Shabbat shalom. Oh, that's not on. Let's try that again. If I can't hear myself echoing off the walls, I know that there's something wrong. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom. Now it's working. All right. Once upon a time, there was somebody that took their kashrut extremely seriously. This was a person who from birth had never tasted bacon, never even smelled a pork chop. But unfortunately, later in life, he got a little sick. There was some strange enzyme imbalance, his doctor told him. And the only solution would be to eat pork. Without pork, he would die. This is, by the way, not true. It's a joke, okay? You just work with me here. That without this enzyme, which could only come from pork, he would pass away within 6 months. Well, he knows that in Judaism, the saving of a life is essential, and even something as taboo as pork, if necessary to keep a person alive, of course, this would be permitted. But he was not going to go down this road just willy-nilly. If he was going to have to eat this, he was going to minimize the damage to kashrut. He was going to make sure that every other aspect of preparing this medicinal pork would be done kosher. So he went to his neighbor, who was a retired kosher butcher, a shochet, and he said, "Will you help me?" The man said, "It's a bit of a problem, but it's a mitzvah to help you. And, I have all of my old knives and all of my skill from when I worked with the cows and sheep. So, yes, I will try to help you make this be kosher." And so they began a pattern. The man who was ill would buy a pig. He would bring it to the butcher. The butcher would prepare just as if he was going to slaughter a cow. If you want to know more about how this works, please watch my Chulin class on Wednesday nights. And he would eat, and he lived. Happy story, except for one day. One day, the butcher is slaughtering the latest pig, and he begins the part of butchering it, opening up, and there's a blemish inside. Now, this, again, you can watch my Mishnah class for more information about this. This becomes an issue. If, to go into the right tone of voice, if it is the kind of blemish that would lead to a fatal condition for the animal, then there's every likelihood that this animal would be considered treifa. The animal would be considered not kosher by means of the blemish. On the other hand, if it is just, one of those little quirks of anatomy that happen to crop up from time to time that are not really any problem, then the animal would be perfectly fine and acceptable. The problem is that the shochet studied the anatomy of goats, sheep, and cows. He's never studied pig anatomy. He doesn't know what is normal and abnormal within a pig, but he knows that this is something he hasn't seen in any of the other pigs, and he also knows that if this were a cow or a goat, he's pretty sure that this would render it off limits. So he goes to the friend and he says, "I'm not sure what to do about this pig, because I know you want to keep kashrut as much as possible, but I don't know how to classify this." So they say, "You know what we should do? We'll ask the rabbi." So they wrap the pig up in a giant plastic tarp, they throw it in the trunk of the car, they drive over to the rabbis, knock on the door, they bring the rabbi back to the back of the car and they say, "We've got a question, Rabbi." They open up the trunk, they unwrap, and there is a half-slaughtered, butchered pig, just dead in the back of the car. And they say, "Rabbi, is this pig kosher?" All right, that's the normal punchline for the joke, and I appreciate you laughing at the right moment. But I'd like to ask you a question. How should the rabbi respond? Take the story seriously for a moment, and we'll set aside the humor. How should the rabbi respond? "Rabbi, is this pig kosher?" Get another pig. This pig is not kosher, but another pig is? Now, none of you think that the rabbi would respond, "What are you, crazy? What, you're an idiot? You're a lunatic? What are you doing wasting my time asking me about a pig being kosher? Every stupid school kid knows that a pig isn't kosher. Get out of here. I'm going to have you removed from the board of the synagogue. I'm going to have you banned from ever having an aliyah again. This is either meant to be a prank, or clearly you are apikorsim, you are heretics that are trying to destroy Judaism. You don't imagine that happening? Maybe you haven't met as many rabbis as I have. So ideally, the rabbi would be aware of the illness of the person. I will tell you, in not exactly strictest confidence, since this is only being live streamed as well as eventually on YouTube, not everybody in a congregation tells the rabbi when they're ill. Not everybody brings it to the congregation's attention and says, oh, by the way, so-and-so is sick, so-and-so is going in for surgery, so-and-so is on a new medicine regime. That doesn't always filter up. And then people will sometimes say, I wonder why the rabbi didn't call. Okay, but that's a whole nother sermon and conversation. Just for the record, rabbis are not mind readers. We read a lot, we don't read minds. So anyway, the rabbi should know, and ideally would, but let's imagine the man was too embarrassed to tell the rabbi that he was now on this forced pork regime, and he didn't want to be embarrassed in front of the rabbi, and especially if the rabbi was the kind of person who, when presented with a dead pig carcass in the trunk of a car, would fly off the handle. Maybe he was right for not wanting the rabbi to know about this situation. But how a rabbi responds to a question or to a challenge is usually in our tradition considered more important than the specific answer that is given. The process of reaching our conclusions is essential, and in fact, it is only when that process is violated that you actually see something like a rabbinic coup. Doesn't happen very often. In fact, we only have one recorded incident, although there's lots of discussion about when it would be appropriate for it to happen. But back in the days, after the Second Temple's destruction, when Judaism was getting back on its feet, trying to stay organized, we had a type of Sanhedrin, a rabbinic court, and at one time the head of that rabbinic court was known as Rabban Gamliel. And he was the ultimate macher. He was the head, the nasi, of this rabbinic court, and he knew it. Like Solomon and David building the temple and their palaces, he was aware of his yichus, he was aware of his lineage, he was aware of his status, and he wanted to make sure others were aware of this as well. Now, it didn't hurt that he was a genius and a brilliant, brilliant sage, and someone that was able to lead the community through one of the more difficult periods of our history. But he was also a bit of a jerk. He was a bit of an arrogant jerk. Now, the other sages overlooked this for the most part because, after all, he came from a good family, he had good yichus, and he was a scholar. Let him keep the position. Until the third time that he targeted one particular rabbi, by coincidence, Rabbi Joshua, and not only contradicted him, not only argued with him, which was the normal way to discuss things. The Sanhedrin, the court was designed for argumentation. But when it came to his attention that Rabbi Joshua had a different opinion, he would make sure to publicly dress him down, to publicly humiliate him, to even go so far as when Rabbi Joshua was not spoiling for a fight, to call him out and say, well, I heard through the grapevine you do disagree with me, so why are you silent there? Stand up here while I lecture everyone why you're wrong. And after a couple times of that, it finally came to the issue of Yom Kippur. You see, back in the day, Yom Kippur was not decided by the calendar that you received from the local funeral home. Yom Kippur was decided based upon the observation of the new moon. And that was a big deal. You needed proper witnesses, you needed a proper setting, you needed the proper timing, and they had to have proper validation, verification, all of the rigmarole. It's quite a involved process. And like any good Jewish involved process, there is room for disagreement on exactly what rules should apply in which circumstance. And Rabbi Joshua disagreed with Rabban Gamliel on this point, and that meant that they were one day off in their interpretation of when Yom Kippur should be. So what did Rabban Gamliel do? Did he say, well, well fought. The majority are on my side. So I'm very sorry, Rabbi Joshua, but Yom Kippur is going to be declared for our community to be this day, not the day you thought. You know, shake hands, GG, good game. No. Rabban Gamliel said, Rabbi Joshua, you are to appear before the Beit Din on the day you thought was Yom Kippur, you idiot, and you have to show up with your staff and wallet, which will prove to everyone that you are bowing to my authority. Because, of course, you're not going to be carrying your staff and wallet on Yom Kippur. So by showing up with these items, Rabban Gamliel is making sure that everybody knows that Rabbi Joshua knows his place. And Rabbi Joshua does. And the community of sages recognize this has gone on too far. This has gone on too far. And they have a coup. It's bloodless. Don't get too excited. It would be for boring television. They simply tell Rabban Gamliel, you're out. You're not the Nasi anymore. You're not the head of the Sanhedrin anymore. Like, but my family, my scholarship, you're out. You're out. Now, they didn't get rid of him because he was wrong. The majority agreed with his position of when Yom Kippur should have been determined that year. They didn't get rid of him because he had a history of being too strict. They didn't get rid of him because he had a history of being too lenient. They didn't get rid of him because he had a particular opinion about any number of topics that caused division among the sages on their many debates. Why did they get rid of him then? You tell me. Because he was a jerk. So being a jerk is a crime? I'm sorry, because he humiliated, which is definitely bad, but come on, I mean, we're going to have bad days, or months, or years.
In front of his peers, in front of the community, like he stripped him of his humanity.
So, new? Why is that a problem in the Sanhedrin, in the court? Why is that a problem in that setting? Because if it had happened on the street, if Rabban Gamliel had just been a jerk to Rabbi Joshua in their private life, this would not have occurred. He would not have been deposed. People might not have liked him. They probably wouldn't have gotten invited to a lot of Shabbos dinners, but he probably would have remained as the head of the Sanhedrin.
I'm just thinking that that much arrogance does not make for a good leader.
That much arrogance does not make for a good leader, because his motivation is wrong. Well, what should his motivation be? Education. The motivation for any discussion and debate within Judaism, and I would argue at any point in our life, needs to be to find the right answer, to find the truth, the solution. Right? When two mathematicians are arguing about the right way to solve an equation, it's not about, or shouldn't be, I've known a lot of mathematicians too, but it shouldn't be, about who is the bigger macher in the mathematics department, who has published the most paper, who is cited the most often. It's supposed to be about who's able to figure out the equation and actually get it to work out at the end. And if they both work on it together, and one says we need to go this way, one says we need to go that way, and they both try their versions, they show each other, they check the work, and it turns out that Mr. A is right and Mr. B is wrong. Mr. B shakes hands, says, thank you very much. I've learned something important today about how to handle this type of equation, and they both go off the better for it.
The rabbi sets an example of refusing to back down on an opinion that's wrong, so people will follow suit.
If the rabbi sets an example of refusing to back down on an opinion that's wrong, the people will follow suit. I mean, people as well will become stubborn and belligerent. But I would argue that it's even worse when the rabbi refuses to back down on an opinion that's right. Not that you should change what is right for what is wrong, but that if the only way you can convince people that you are right is by humiliating them, is by embarrassing them, is by stripping them of their humanity, by making them feel less, by making them feel they have no right to question your opinion, one day you're going to be wrong. Because there is only one that is infallible, and he's not showing up in court, or at least not in a way that we're able to get his opinion. One day, Rabban Gamliel is going to be wrong. I mean, he was wrong about how he treated Rabbi Joshua, but I mean, just in general, in terms of his rulings, one day he's going to get it wrong. And will he back down? Why would he? Right? If he's wrong, then he'll just humiliate enough people until the others decide that he's right. If we allow somebody to rule by the dictatorial nature of their personality, by using the authority of their position to tear down the argument of someone else, then Judaism falls apart. Because there is no mystical answer key that we can double check against someone's opinion. There's no secret decoder ring to know whether the rabbi got it right or wrong. The only thing we have are the arguments and debates which must flow freely, must be done respectfully, and must be done with a genuine and honest intention to try and find the best answer, regardless of whether it is my answer at the beginning of the conversation or not. The ability to retract your opinion in the face of a better argument is the ultimate sign of being a sage and a scholar. And Rabban Gamliel was showing that he was not going to do so. By showing how he was going to humiliate someone who had lost, it showed that he was going to always demand subservience from everyone, and subservience means that Torah loses. Subservience means that we lose. Because no one wanted Rabban Gamliel to be the dictator because he had some infallible connection to God. That's a different religion, and if you prefer that, welcome to it. But it's not Judaism. Yes, we need to have a structure and order, a forum for discussion. It can't be a complete free-for-all. But the process needs to be protected, defended constantly to avoid any single person trying to claim dominance, or even a small subgroup trying to claim dominance on any kind of authority other than the strength of their arguments. And doing anything to chill that debate, to diminish that discussion, to make people feel afraid to have those ideas, that robs us all of the wisdom that was meant to be shared. So a new Nasi was brought in, a new head of the Sanhedrin was brought in, and the next day there were hundreds and hundreds of new students that were brought in to study along with them. They had just been kept outside by Rabban Gamliel. Not only was he humiliating one person, but he was holding others at arm's length, keeping them from even entering into the forum, disenfranchising them, if you will, not even allowing their opinions to be heard. And hundreds of halachot were decided on the day that happened. In fact, it became such a thing that there is a byword in the Talmud anytime they talk about the decisions that were made on that day of his ouster, that it's Bayom Hahu. On that day, we decided this. On that day, we decided this. Once we got him out, we were actually able to get some work done. And we were actually able to get the opinions together and make it happen and have the proper democratic analysis of the scholars take place. Now you're probably wondering, so what happens to Rabban Gamliel? Does he just go and retire in his villa? No, he is devastated. He is hurt by all of this. And he goes and talks to his colleagues about how can I make this right? Which does show that he wasn't a complete jerk, just a little one. And so they say, we have to go and talk to Rabbi Joshua. Get him to forgive you, and we will accept you back. And he does. He goes to Rabbi Joshua's house for the first time in his life. We know it's the first time because as he comes to Rabbi Joshua's house, he sees the soot, and the cords of wood and the ash everywhere, and he goes, "Oh, I didn't know you were a charcoal maker," which is the lowest of low jobs at that time in our history. He didn't even know who he was arguing against. He didn't know Rabbi Joshua's life, his circumstance, the difficulties that he had to do just to be able to be available to study in the Beit Midrash and to give his opinion. Rabban Gamliel had been born with a silver spoon, I guess, a silver Torah in his mouth. Rabbi Joshua had had to scrape his way up from the bottom, and the two were meant to be equal in the Beit Midrash. And Rabban Gamliel had perverted that without even realizing what he was doing. And Rabbi Joshua, when he hears Rabban Gamliel go, "Whoa, I didn't know you were a charcoal maker," says, "Woe to the generation whose leaders don't know who they are." How can you hope to make decisions for the people without even knowing who the people are? Are you really in your ivory tower so much that you do not connect to these people? And then you have the audacity to use your position and authority to try and subjugate them. And at that moment, Rabban Gamliel turned from what might have been a pro forma apology into a legitimate one. He recognized the depth of his error extended far beyond just embarrassing Rabbi Joshua a few times. He realized that the depth of his error was that he had truly twisted and perverted the process that was meant to lead us towards a better understanding of Torah in each successive conversation and debate. And so he is able to secure Rabbi Joshua's legitimate forgiveness because they finally understand each other. And Rabban Gamliel comes back in, and he is reappointed on an alternative basis with his replacement, it's another longer story there, as being the head of the Sanhedrin. They take turns. There's a power-sharing agreement, if you will. Now, the point of the story is not just the details of what happened to Rabban Gamliel, but the point of the story is also that later generations knew what happened to Rabban Gamliel. This is one of the most famous sections of the Talmud that is discussed in rabbinic schools. And it's not discussed just because it's juicy and gossipy and, all this wonderful drama. It is taught as a reminder to rabbis, you be like Rabban Gamliel, and you'll get the boot. And not only will you get the boot, you'll deserve the boot. Because no matter what you may think that your smicha is telling everyone else in the world about your position of power and authority, ultimately, if you humiliate your communities or the community of other rabbis that you work of in your community, they will have every right and indeed should remove you from that position. Because you will no longer be doing the job you are meant to do, which is to help clarify Torah in application for the community that you serve. But if you aggrandize yourself too much, if you take on the airs of arrogance too much, if you chill the discussion so that no one dare ask a question to the holy, saintly rabbi of, Rabbi, why did you decide to do X rather than Y? Or why is it our congregation doesn't do B when I know that that's something other congregations do? If no one would dare ask such a question of you, then you are a failure as a rabbi. Doesn't matter whether you're being more strict, doesn't matter whether you're being more lenient. Doesn't matter how many books you publish, it doesn't matter how many podcasts or YouTube videos you put out. If no one will dare question what you're doing, then how will they learn? Just memorize your rulings with no explanation, no depth, no content? Judaism does not believe in the dictatorial power of rabbis. We got rid of our priestly class, no offense to the Kohanim here, and removed them from the hereditary structure of authority, even though we keep the hereditary honor. And we replaced it with what is meant to be a meritocracy, but a meritocracy has to be defended. A meritocracy has to be protected. Sometimes a meritocracy needs a kick in the seat. Thankfully, it only took one real version of this to set a precedent for our people over the last few thousand years. And we've done pretty well holding on to it since then. Yes? The punchline is the punchline. It's always dangerous to ask what happens next at the end of a joke. So, you can imagine for yourself whether or not that pig would have been kosher under those circumstances. You don't need to ask the rabbi for that, as it is a fictional story designed just to break the ice and get us to chuckle. But ultimately, the fact that they were willing to ask the rabbi what would otherwise seem a stupid question shows me that in that joke, perhaps that rabbi was a decent person and would never have answered the way that I jokingly said that he would explode with righteous indignation at what had just been presented to him. They thought, you know what? The rabbi will understand. He'll give us an answer, he'll give us an explanation, and we'll all learn. Maybe it will be inapplicable to any other circumstance except for the unique circumstance of this one person that needs to eat this. But we will learn about the process of asking questions and the process of kashrut and the process of how it enriches our lives. And all of that will make us better. And how much would be lost if they never even thought they could ask the question? If they never dared to ask the question? Judaism is the religion of audacity. We challenge God. We challenge our sages. We challenge each other. And done with respect and done with honor, this has allowed us to thrive and rise amazingly to amazing heights. If we do it in the other way, then you're just being argumentative. Shabbat Shalom.